His book is called Where Cowards Go to Die, and author Benjamin Sledge joins us now. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, you have an incredible book out here, but do you have a legacy of military service in your family?
Yeah, it's crazy. This is actually in the book too. We've traced it as far back as a general under Napoleon, is how far back we go.
Wow.
So it's pretty wild. My grandfather was a paratrooper in World War II with the 82nd Airborne. And then ironically, when I ended up in Afghanistan, I was underneath the 3504th Blue Devils before they disbanded of the 82nd Airborne. So it's funny that I have such a long history in the military, and we kind of joke and just say it runs in the blood. So as far as I know, my great grandfather, he fought in World War I. My grandfather fought in World War II. I know we fought in the Civil War, and like our house was divided. Some people fought for the Union, some people fought for the South. On the Sledge side, I think it was the South. On the other side, it was like the North. So then we didn't have anybody in Vietnam, but my great uncle, Charlie Applin Sledge, he stormed the beaches in the Pacific during World War II. And then my grandfather also served. My other grandfather, paternal side, he served in World War II. My uncles enlisted in the military, didn't deploy to Vietnam. My uncle got shot in the arm in a hunting accident, so he ended up getting out of the military. My dad tried to enlist in the Air Force. He had asthma as a kid. They disbarred him. And then me and my brother joined. And we expect that someday probably our kids will we'll have no idea why.
They're following your footsteps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I did sort of similar to you, tracing back my history on Ancestry.com. My father passed away. He didn't serve in the military, but he passed away when I was 4. So I wanted to know more about his family. And I was able to trace his side of the family back to service in the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. Mm. My great grandfather served at Gettysburg and Fredericksburg.
Wow.
My 5th great grandfather served under Washington at Lexington and Concord, Jonas child. So it's really cool to check back, and discover these things.
Yeah, it's wild. Everyone asks me if I'm related to Eugene Bondurant Sledge, who wrote With the Old Breed, which is considered like one of the greatest.
Sure.
Marine memoirs of all time turned into the Pacific. And I got on Ancestry and I was like, and it led me down this rabbit hole. And I was like, I would have to hire some genealogist to figure this out. I have no idea. But the Sledges are all from the South. And my family is all from like Tennessee, Alabama area. So I was like, yeah, this makes sense. But who knows? Might be.
Yeah, that is an incredible book. And I wasn't going to ask you that because I didn't assume from reading your notes that was the case, but I do know that book. What drove you with your combat experience and your current, your service? What drove you to write such a personal book? Were there demons, or was it just something that you had to do?
It was both. I didn't talk about war for probably a decade. When I got home from Afghanistan, I wanted to be one of those veterans who talked about my experience, and I suddenly discovered why other veterans and combat veterans don't. And when you've been involved in kind of moral quagmires and questionable situations and circumstances that involve death and gore, you do things to kind of stay sane in those environments. You'll have the gallows humor, as many first responders do. You'll laugh about things that you probably shouldn't. Right. And I remember I began to tell these stories, and people would do the uncomfortable shift, or they would smile, and I could tell it was totally fake. And their body language and demeanor just kind of communicated, there's something wrong with you. You're a monster. And so I just stopped. I was like, okay, this is something we just don't talk about. My grandfather, he never talked about his experience in World War II, except for like a few funny stories where he was like General Patton's Scotch supplier. And there's a whole story in the book behind that. But for me, I didn't write or talk about it until one day close to Memorial Day, I wrote a piece for medium.com, and it went mega viral. It hit like over 500,000 views very quickly. And I was just like, what on earth is going on here? And I wrote about the situations and circumstances that we face on the battlefield, whether it's, having to decide whether to shoot a woman or child, or coming home to a country that no longer feels like home. And I couldn't figure out the emotions that I was feeling, because it didn't feel like post-traumatic stress. It felt like getting punched in the soul. And I discovered there was a term for it called moral injury, where that's where you have to do things that violate your sense of right and wrong, and you incur psychological damage because of it. So I wrote this one-off article about my time overseas, and it just blew up. And my editor at Medium, I asked her, and I acknowledge her in the thanks. I said, hey, what do you guys want to hear about? She said, oh man, we love your stuff about war. That was a really good article. You should write more on that. I was like, I'm not going to do that. And she said, well, that's the travesty. And I said, why? And she's, she's an African-American woman. And she said, you're the smallest minority in the United States. Do you realize that? I said, what do you mean? She said, less than 1% of you have fought in the longest running wars in the history of the United States. You come home, you don't talk about it. We're losing all these stories of the complexity, the humanity, and the barbarity of combat that we need to hear to understand you all. And yet you alienate yourselves. And she said, and we're left in the dark. And she said, and that's the travesty. And it really shook me up. And I was like, man, I think I need to tell these stories. Yeah. And a buddy of mine who is in Iraq had begun just kind of chronicling his own experience. He wasn't a writer. He just put together like a WordPress blog. And he was like, I just want my kids to know what happened before like my memory gets bad or I get old. And I was like, that's actually really powerful. And what really drove me to write the book is the fact that everything that I've read in the Iraq and Afghan war genres is somewhat broken or incomplete. A lot of it's about the jingoistic heroics that, where it's like, I'm a Navy SEAL. That's the joke in the industry right now. You're a Navy SEAL, you get a book deal. And so I've
interviewed Navy SEALs, as a matter of fact.
And trust me, I got a lot of friends who are, and they're great guys, but I mean, it's the joke going around. But I felt like it didn't explain the portions where I didn't look like the good guy. It was more like the movie Fury with Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf, where you're not sure if the Americans are sometimes the good guys. And that was my experience. That was a lot of our experiences where we were just having to do questionable stuff, and there were hijinks and craziness. And it wasn't the softer, kinder, gentler army. It was wartime army. So just kind of anything went. And I was like, man, and I had talked to so many other veterans and other people that had served, and they just felt like our story was not being told. And so I wanted to flip that script and have it encapsulate what we really deal with, everything from the moral, the existential, the physical, the emotional, and even the spiritual. And I really took that direction because of a book I read by Carl Marlantes, who's a Vietnam veteran, called What It's Like to Go to War. And he talked about how war is actually a very spiritual place, and I agreed, and it kind of shook me to my core. So I wanted to flip the narrative. So that's why I wrote it.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And along with that, do you recall your first sort of soul-shaking experience in combat?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of funny. There's two incidences really. The first was when I arrived in Iraq, Afghanistan, and we started getting shelled. And I'm in a bunker, and there's just literally nothing you can do. And just like E.B. Sledge kind of talks about, it's just kind of this invention from hell where it just kind of terrifies the mind, because bullets are surgical, but you don't know a lot of times where artillery is going to land, and then like what it does to the body and the way it shreds, and it might take off a limb, or you have a sucking chest wound, or shrapnel peppered everywhere. And that really tortures the mind. And so for me, that kind of became like that first experience where it rattled me. The second one was when I started seeing dead bodies, and after firefights and stuff, this special forces team had gotten to a skirmish like shortly up the road from us. And there was this, I'll never forget it, this dude in a blue Toyota Hilux who had been killed, and he looked like a drunk who had fallen out of his seat. And was like half in the car and half out, and his kind of guts are spilling out of the seat and entrails. He has a hole through his head. And I remember I had to snap a photo for a report, and I was just like, okay, this is death. And they'd been out there in the sun a little bit, so there's a stench, and there's a very distinct smell to death. And it's kind of like knockoff CK1 cologne dabbed on like rotting meat. It's like this sickly sweet disgustingness. And that was the moment where things started to really shift for me. And I was like, man, okay, we're in combat. This is life and death. And then you just kind of grow accustomed. And it's weird. You don't want to die, but you just kind of become accustomed to the fact that you just might die today. Yeah. And it's a very strange and awkward place to be at, but you kind of normalize it. And then you begin to laugh about the stuff that you see as far as death and destruction, to kind of keep your mind from that trauma.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine for people, I'm sure, but I would imagine that all petty concerns kind of go by the wayside when you integrate.
That's the toughest part about readjusting into civilian society. It's like 1 minute you're overseas, everybody's trying to kill you, and then like the next you're home and everybody's so aloof because these wars have been going on forever. They're like, oh my gosh, did you hear it's pumpkin spice latte season? And you're like, cool. And then this scene in the movie The Hurt Locker really nails it, for all the absurdity of as far as like how they portrayed the Iraq war. They nailed the ending where Jeremy Renner comes back home and he's just looking dead-eyed at all the options at the supermarket for cereal. And I remember I went to a Chinese buffet and just stood there for like 20 minutes. And I was like, what do I eat? Because I was so used to like, okay, today's an MRE or it's these sea rats or whatever. And it was paralyzing. It overwhelmed the senses.
Yeah, that was my next question is you came back and had to readjust to society, and that's kind of your introduction. It's overwhelming. The variety in the supermarket and the variety everywhere and the petty concerns back in civilian life. But you adjusted, obviously, but then you made a decision to return to active service. What drove that?
When I came back, it was okay for a little bit, and then things started bugging me, and that's when everything kicked up. And then I became kind of the violent, scary veteran who just, when you got into the booze, you never knew who was going to come out. And this went on for a while until my friends and family had like an intervention with me. Once I had kicked in the door of my girlfriend's house, just drunk and going crazy. And I got in with a really good counselor who really helped me navigate my emotions and what I felt. I downplayed a lot of my experiences because I was afraid that it would get back to, the military, or that, as this wacko or whatever. And that's kind of the thing in the military is mental health is an oxymoron. Yeah. So I kept that real quiet and real under wraps, but it got me into kind of a decent space after, a year, and learned the tools necessary to kind of catch myself when I was slipping. But I still didn't feel like I belonged because, life is just going on. Everybody's going on. And I'm thinking about there's a war going on. And my best friend had been killed while I was overseas. He had replaced me. And so there was just kind of this like, man, we got to finish this thing. Yeah. And I swore I would never go back overseas again because it messed me up. But one day, my team sergeant, he's in the book as well. His name's Paul Gonzo Gonzalez. That's his real name. He's like, hey man, we're putting together a team and we're going to Iraq and you're coming with me. And I was like, no, hell no. And we had all these like post 9/11 newbie privates and people that hadn't served. And he just literally told me, he said, hey man, if you want to, he said, sooner or later, you're going to go overseas. He's like, these wars aren't ending anytime soon. He's like, if you want to get stacked with a bunch of turds and get yourself killed, be my guest. And I was like, all right, man, give me the rest of the day. And other friends from Afghanistan were going, and there's this joke. It's not even a joke. It's just something that your parents tell you as a kid. It's like, if all your friends were jumping off a bridge, would you do it? I'm sure you remember that.
Oh yeah.
And the problem with the military is the answer is yes. It's like the dumbest thing that they ask you to do. You're like, if you served in combat with them, you're like, I'm in. Okay, cool. And so I just jumped off that bridge with them and I volunteered. I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? I'll go. I didn't even have to go. They were just putting together this special team. And by the end of the day, I'd signed on, picked my team. And the thing was I had really found myself missing war because, again, I missed the simplicity, the camaraderie, the brotherhood. I didn't have to worry about dating or entertaining my girlfriend or any of that stuff or money. It was just a mission and some purpose. And that's what you lose when you come home. You lose that sense of mission and purpose. And so I was like, man, I can find that once more. And so I went.
What was your role when you returned to service?
So I was the platoon sergeant for a 4-man, it's called a CAT A, which stands for Civil Affairs Team Alpha. And we worked with the local and indigenous populations, rebuilding the infrastructure, but also at the same time, minimizing civilian interference on the battlefield. So I like to tell people you get to see the best of war and the worst of war. You're either going to make a lot of friends or you get shot at a lot. So we went in there and we're the cultural experts and advisors, but we got sent to Ramadi during the surge from 2006 to 2007. And that's where, Chris Kyle earned his nickname, the Devil. Jocko Willink and Task Force Bruiser were there. The Battle of Ramadi was just kind of like the epicenter of hell. And will probably go down in like modern history, kind of as similar to like the Battle of the Bulge, just because it was a war of attrition for a real long time until we retook the city through some civil military operations that a guy named Captain Travis Patrickman put together, who was their civil affairs liaison for the head of the 1st Armored Division, who really understood the mission and how to flip the local tribal warlords and sheiks. And it worked. And we were able to implement that. And it became kind of the strategy for all of the Iraq war and coin, because we took the most violent city and then flipped it to one of the most pacified cities.
Yeah, it was recognized as a great success.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you served in Afghanistan as well. And,
Correct.
Over the last couple of years, we witnessed the withdrawal this nation made from that nation. And I'm sure it was mixed emotions, but what were your initial thoughts when you saw everything unfolding?
That was a gut punch. It's weird when we lost Ramadi to ISIS, it didn't bug me as much. I think because of the fact that I was wounded over there and I lost my best friend and knew other guys that died. It just, for me, it's like a punch to the face. And all of a sudden, me and my buddies are calling each other. I'm up wandering my house at 3 a.m. I haven't done that in years. My wife just is like, you are a crazy person right now. It threw me for this crazy loop. Yeah. And, I'm an equal opportunity offender as far as like politics in the book. And I was like, God, the Biden administration just botched this. But then on top of that, we're talking about 20 years of multiple presidents who just had a complete inability to figure out what the hell we were doing there and just continued to botch it. And we had like all these lives lost, and they just continually sold it as, lipstick on a pig. Like 1 minute it's like about the war on drugs, it's like, oh, we got to shut down these poppy fields in the Silk Road leading into Pakistan. And the next they're like, we found commodities in the mountains, and so we can make Afghanistan rich. Honestly, they should turn it into a ski resort if they could ever stop the terrorism. The mountains are incredible there. You'd hit a bunch of landmines, so they'd have to clear it all out. But that would be my suggestion for it. But anyway, it really threw a ton of us for a loop. And I got back in counseling after that. I was like, man, this is not a good spot for me to be living in. And my wife and kids could tell that, something was up. And I, for me, like I said, I think it was just the fact that, well, Ramadi was like deeply personal and it was crazy. We called it the meat grinder. Afghanistan was where my best friend was killed, and I had blood spilt over there of my own. And I don't know, it messed me up. And I was mad. I was really mad because of the fact that everybody suddenly remembers the war, and you have these service members who die, and you go to the bar and you see them setting out the deals. And I was like, what about those of us that fought for 20 years?
Right.
You stole our youth. There was no draft. You made us basically institutionalize, and now we all have mental health issues. Come on. And it was only then that they kind of seemed to care. But also at the same time, I was like, man, I can't be mad, at the populace. This is what we fight for. So we fight for them to be aloof about all this stuff and to enjoy their day-to-day freedoms and go to Starbucks and yell at their baristas. So, and so that's really kind of where it came down to. It was just a hodgepodge of conflicting emotions. But one of my buddies, he was a pilot for the Air Force in Vietnam, and we would eat dinner every Sunday before I moved to Colorado for over a decade. I just texted him one morning at like 1 a.m. He was up too. And I said, now I know how you feel like after Vietnam. And he just put, yeah, you do. So.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm actually doing a Vietnam War project right now, a film on Vietnam. And it's a war where their service men and women need to be honored.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully in the coming years, people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, get the honor they deserve, instead of just, thank you very much, well, on to the next war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you so much for being on the show today. The book is called Where Cowards Go to Die, and I encourage everyone to pick it up. Thank you, sir, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.